Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome, everybody, to Nightlight. Today is a very, very exciting show for me. But before we get to that, I want to remind you that that amazing intro was done by Ken Quiethawk, and you can find him and all of his material at nativestorytellers.com. Check it out. It's a really fascinating site. Today, Mark has a very special person here, and I think that it's one of the topics that I have studied and been fascinated with for decades and decades. So I'm jealous that he gets to do this interview first. But in a couple of weeks, I get to have his guest on my show. So you're going to get double barrel here. And I do warn you that the material is fascinating. So if you're trying to do two things at once, stop one of them and listen, because it's going to be a fantastic show. So Mark, are you there?
Yep, I am here.
I am turning it over to you. Have fun.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's, this afternoon might be heretical by some standards, but that's okay. I think we need to discuss possibility of mistaken identities over history, and we're going to be looking at some other precedents for that as the show goes on. And when I've spoken with Reverend Michael Carter about interpreting passages from the Bible, he said there are times when one needs to read it literally. Other times, passages are to be understood symbolically. And that was some of his learning from the Union Seminary. Do I believe every single event about the Eden story, like Eve was created from Adam's rib? No. It's a creation story like every culture has. Do I believe God, the divine architect, created the universe? No, yeah, I do believe that. I also believe there was a worldwide flood. So, there's some biblical accuracy there. Support the golden rule, and big advocate for not killing each other. But why do some groups, like the Templars, later the Freemasons, seem to have knowledge of Jesus' existence, and they're very protective of it. That's another interesting mystery. So, I agree with parts of the Bible. I didn't know if that is considered cherry picking, but I don't want to disregard the moral instructions. However, today's show is going to be a re-evaluation of the Old and New Testaments. We're going to get into more confirmation about biblical characters, but they were documented incorrectly to help us have a better understanding of Kings David and Solomon. We'll be talking about Isaac. We have Ahmed Osman as our special guest this afternoon. His new book is Egyptian Origins of King David and the Temple of Solomon, and it was just published by Inner Traditions. And I want to thank Ashley and Manzanita for helping us to connect with Ahmed. His books can be found at innertraditions.com or amazon.com. Ahmed was born in Cairo and has lived in England for many decades and is a biblical scholar researching the historical origins of biblical characters. So welcome, Ahmed. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you.
Good. I'm sure most of our listeners are familiar with King David and his rise and the battle with Goliath and rising to become king. So maybe we ought to start with our discussion about what do we know from about David from the the Bible. At the beginning of your book, it gives a little review about he was a shepherd, had some musical talent. What are some other just basic information that's presented in the Bible about the person who'd become King David?
Yeah, we have two books really in the Bible. It talks about the King David. You see,
Mm-hmm.
the book of Samuel and the book of Kings.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, he started as a young shepherd with a musical kind of interest, and King Saul brought him to entertain him and so on. And then he was a young man at the time, and then the Israelites had a conflict with the Philistines, and the giant Goliath came out and challenged the Israelites to fight a single fight. Nobody was able to face him, but this young boy came out and faced Goliath and defeated him, and he became a hero within the Israel, according to the Bible, to the extent that King Saul himself was jealous of him and tried eventually to get rid of him. He's supposed to have lived during the 10th century BC, and then he, after the death of King Saul and his son, he was anointed as king of Israel, and he united Israel and Judea, the United Kingdom. And then he went out after entering Jerusalem, he went out to fight the Philistines and other nations of Western, Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean, and he established an empire extending from the northern Syria at the Euphrates River down up to Egypt, the borders of Egypt. And the Bible mentioned a specific kind of locations where he destroyed cities, and he established some kind of buildings like his royal palace in Jerusalem and so on. and that's it. However, in modern times, I mean, up to the 19th century, all what we knew really about King David or even the pharaohs of Egypt came from the Bible, because there is no, or some Greek classical writers. History was part of literature up to the mid-19th century. Then, when the Europeans started digging, archaeological digging, in Egypt and in the Levant, in Palestine and Syria and so on, they started to uncover, bring out some information, written texts as well as archaeological objects. And we started to get our information from archaeology. And archaeology started to, use different sciences like DNA to make dating, and like scanning, and different kinds of. So now history becomes part of science rather than part of literature. So we know more, definitely, because we do have the mummy, we do have the temple, we do have the text, we have many things that we can know. In fact, we know more about Tutankhamun and his time, maybe more than we know about somebody who lived 50 years ago, because we have all the objects, we have all the details, we can examine it. The Bible is a book of faith, a book of religion. It's not a book of history, but of all, as well as the stories of creation and the flood and so on, which similar to some kind of Iraqi kind of Mesopotamian kind of ancient beliefs. In the Bible, we find some stories about real people who are supposed to live real times, and real events, historical events, like the stories of Joseph, the story of Isaac, Joseph, Israel or Jacob, and Abraham, and so on. And the thing is, the biblical story, obviously, as a religion, it has a little bit of symbolism in some cases and exaggeration in other cases, like all the written texts of the ancient times, the Greek and so on, wrote in the same kind of exaggeration way and so on. However, you see, when the modern archaeologists start digging at the level of the 9th century BC, trying to find out evidence of the David Empire, they found nothing. Nothing. All the locations that mentioned in the Bible were dug by archaeologists, including Israeli archaeologists, and they found no evidence whatsoever to confirm this story. So the conclusion of modern archaeologists is that these stories were just, fiction and not true. However, I disagree with this idea because I did not follow the chronology of the Bible. According to the Bible chronology, the world was created 5,000 years ago. And obviously we know now it was there millions of years ago. People without a tail existed hundreds of thousands of years ago, not just 5 years. So we should not take the biblical chronology as a kind of reality of things. Now in the science world, we have to rely on science to make the time thing. So because archaeologists, modern archaeologists, followed the chronology of the Bible. So when they dug in the 9th century BC, they found nothing. But I did not follow the chronology of the Bible. I rather follow the events mentioned in the Bible. So the Bible says there was an empire by King David. I mean, and they mentioned special location which were destroyed at the time and special thing. And when although the archaeologists did not find any evidence in the level of the 9th century BC, they found all the evidence that confirm the biblical account of King David's empire exactly only five centuries before. So I rather than relying on the chronology, I relied on the evidence of the empire mentioned in the Bible. So I came to the 15th century BC for King David. I mean, so it is not, I mean, the biblical authors, biblical writers, the scribes who wrote the Bible, they were in Babylon after Nebuchadnezzar, destroyed Judea. He took the upper class and the scholars, the scribes, into Babylon. And there they started, because after the death of Moses, the Israelites really, went back on the 10 Commandments and they worshipped other deities like Baalim and so on, Ashtaroth and so on. And although many prophets came all over the way asking them to go back to the Mosaic teaching, they did not. However, when after the Babylonian exile, the scribes and the priests started to think, maybe we have been punished by God because we have departed, we have left the Mosaic teaching. Then they started writing the Bible. So the Bible was written in Babylon for the first time from the 6th century BC, about 8 centuries after the death of Moses, you see. They used for the sources of information, different sources. Some of it was written and some of it was oral. Some of it came from Egypt, some of it came from Mesopotamia, some of them came from different areas, you see. And these stories were not put in a chronological area. They edited it into what it is now in the Bible. So, the thing is, the relationship between Egypt and Israel is the cornerstone of the Bible, really. The exodus of Moses, the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt is the cornerstone. Without the exodus, there is no Bible, really.
Right.
If you allow me, I have to talk about why have I started all this research about myself, first of all. I was a young boy, about 14 years old, when the United Nations decided to divide Palestine into two countries, two states, one Israeli and one Arab. At the time, I was really, in a way, more religious, Islamic kind of thing. And at the time, I was even following the extreme fanatic Islamic group of the Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood. At the time, they told me and other child, if you go to fight, this is 1947, to fight in Palestine to prevent the establishment of the Jewish state, you have nothing to lose. You either kill the Jews, the enemies of God, or you are killed yourself, become a martyr, and you go to heaven directly, you see. So I liked the idea, and I went to ask them to join the group, and luckily they did not accept me because I was 14 years of age I'm not allowed. By the time you see the next fighting came through, I mean, I had grown up and become a journalist, and obviously I have completely left the Islamic kind of traditional. I mean, this kind of.
You've renounced their teachings.
So I wanted to know. I wanted to know, why is this conflict between Egypt and Israel continuous conflict? With that, I mean, the Germans and the British, I mean, and the French fought in the Second World War. However, after the war ended, they sat down and made it up, and they are friends. Why can't we do that with the Israelis? What is the? So I thought it must be something to do with the roots, common roots between us and the Jews, the Israelites. So because I went to, for the first time, because Muslims don't read the Bible. So I got a copy of the Bible and started to read the book of Exodus. So I realized that they came to Egypt as a small Hebrew tribe, and they went out as a great nation. I mean, the Bible was given to Moses, the Ten Commandments, on Mount Sinai in Egypt. Moses himself was brought up in the royal palace, and so on. So I thought there must be something in our common roots. I mean, that made us. Made a taboo established between us, and so we cannot talk because I mean there's something we cannot accept. So I wanted to uncover the roots. So I decided to come to England and study if the Bible stories about the Israelites in Egypt and the Exodus was a historical fact, then nowadays with all these archaeological discoveries, we should know some evidence of that from historical sources. So I came to study the history behind the Bible. So I studied evening course first, 3 years ancient Egyptian history, then 3 years the hieroglyphic language. Then I studied, with some Jewish friends, the Hebrew, classical Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, and so on, in order. So I started to dig there. And then I realized, you see, that the Bible stories do have historical facts. The only thing is, it is confusing because the chronology of the Bible is making it. And for instance, you see, I mean, the first thing I started to think of Joseph, because Patriarch Joseph of the coat of many colors is supposed to have been sold by his brothers as a slave in Egypt, and there, after being able to, interpret the dream of Pharaoh about the 7 cows, lean cows, and the 7 fat cows, and so on, Pharaoh appointed him as one of his ministers. And then from there, later on, Joseph asked Pharaoh if he can bring his family, Jacob and the Israelites, to Egypt, and Pharaoh accepted that. And then Jacob came with 70, the total number of his family, 70 people came to Egypt. Jacob met Pharaoh and blessed him and died in Egypt. And so the first connection between Egypt and Israelites, the Hebrews first became Israelites, was in Egypt at the time of Joshua. However, when I came to study the history of David, I realized that the connection between Egypt and the Hebrews really started much earlier, at the time of Abraham. Why is that? Because the evidence of the empire between the Euphrates and the Nile come from the time of 15th century BC, when Thutmose III established the first great empire in history between the Nile and the Euphrates. It was established by a king called, of the 18th dynasty, Egyptian dynasty, called Thutmose III, you see. So Thutmose III lived in the 15th century BC, was a contemporary of Abraham. And here I found a very interesting story in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis mentioned a story that Abraham in Canaan, one day there was a famine in the land, so he decided to go to Egypt. In crossing the borders, he told his wife Sarah, "Don't say that you are my wife, so they might find you attractive and so on, and they might take you and they will kill me to keep you. So say you are my sister." Eventually, the story says, this is the biblical story, that Pharaoh knew through his people, attendants and so on, of how beautiful this Sarah was. So he invited Abraham and Sarah in the palace, and then he asked Abraham for her hand, and so he gave her dowry to Abraham, and he married Sarah. So Sarah, the wife of Abraham, was married to Pharaoh. This is a story that cannot be invented by the biblical scholars, because it's a shameful story that people really try to hide out. The fact that the Bible mentioned this story, that Abraham gave his own wife to Pharaoh to be married to Pharaoh, indicates that this is a real story and not an invented story. So the thing is, after that, the story says that royal palace was plagued. So Pharaoh called Abraham and asked him, "Why did you say this was your sister? Why didn't you tell me it was your wife?" Because according to Egyptian moralities, this was not allowed. It's not right for a man to marry, to have a woman married to somebody else. Take your wife and take everything and leave and go. When they returned back to Canaan, obviously, eventually, Isaac was born. So Sarah, being married to two men, Pharaoh of Egypt and Abraham, gave birth to Isaac, whose son was Isaac. This is the story. Why should Abraham, after Isaac's birth, take the young child and go to Jerusalem, on the rock of the mount in Jerusalem, and try to sacrifice him just because he saw in a dream that he has to kill him? And then the Lord stopped him, "Don't kill the boy." I mean, then again, the indication, many indication in the Bible story itself that indicate that the child was the son of Pharaoh rather than being the son of Abraham. So, for instance, the Lord appeared to Abraham and tell him, "I make a covenant with you to be circumcised." Abraham, when he was an old man, to be circumcised, and all the male men in your house should be circumcised as a sign of covenant between me and you. This is a very strange thing, because until that date, only Egyptian males were circumcised. No other nation was circumcised. So in a way, the covenant with Abraham and the Israelites and his men and the Hebrews, they were Hebrews, not Israelites yet, was a kind of making them Egyptians, you see. Then again, Abraham had married, other than Sarah, married also, Hagar, and brought Ishmael from Hagar. And he married another woman called Keturah from northern Arabia, and he brought 7 sons from Keturah. So he had 6 sons from Keturah. So he has 7 sons other than Ishmael, other than Isaac. However, the Lord tells him, the descendants of Isaac, only the descendants, Isaac and his descendants, will inherit the land between the Nile Euphrates, the river Nile and the river Euphrates. This was exactly the empire established by Pharaoh, who met Abraham, Tutmosis III. So all this indicates really to me that Isaac was the son of Pharaoh rather than the son of Abraham. The Bible tried, because when the Exodus took place, at the time of the Exodus, the Pharaoh who ruled Egypt was, this was after the Amarna, after Moses and Amarna, was against the Israelites. So there was a kind of conflict and hatred between the two sides, the Tutmosides of the 19th dynasty and the Israelites who left Egypt. So the biblical story tried to deny any kind of connection between the Egyptian royal family and the Israelites. In fact, it was Sigmund Freud who noted that first regarding the birth of Moses. Sigmund Freud, who was a liberal Jew who lived in Austria and then died in London, he wrote the last book he wrote in London, really, was called Moses and Monotheism. And he said, he claimed in one of his chapters that Moses was an Egyptian. And he said, okay, the story of the birth of Moses is repeated really for other heroes of ancient times, like Agag of Mesopotamia and Oedipus of the Greeks and so on. But he said in all these cases, a child was born to a royal family, and the royal family was threatened. So they smuggled out the child to be brought up by a poor family in order to save him and save the throne. And when he grows up, he comes and claims the throne of his father. Only in the case of Moses, the story is switched. Other than being born in a royal family and being brought up by a poor family, here we find him born to a Hebrew poor family and brought up by the royal family. He said that the scribes writing the Bible deliberately tried to hide the original Egyptian nature of Moses by switching this account, you see. So, at the time of the Exodus, there was a kind of enmity and conflict between the Israelites and not the same situation when Joseph was there, and there was a kind of welcome between the two sides.
Yeah.
So I thought that that Abraham story was deliberately they denied the Egyptian father. In my book, I state in the first part of my book that Israel is the illegitimate son of Egypt, who is fighting, trying to force his father to accept him.
Yeah, Ahmed, I just wanted to quickly interject that Throughout the early part of the book, you also do develop a unification theme between Egypt and Canaan, and that the Pharaoh did welcome Isaac and his family to live with him in Egypt. So there was a welcoming an offer to unify both regions.
Yeah, I mean, yes, because you see, the story and in fact the history after that explains how when Joseph came to Egypt, he was, welcomed eventually by Pharaoh, who appointed him as his minister.
Mm-hmm.
And then, in fact, I have argued in one of my books that there was a minister of Amenhotep III of the 18th century, a grandson of Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, grandson of Thutmose III, appointed Yuya, a character called Yuya, as his minister. And this Yuya, in one of my books, I confirmed, I have argued and shown that Yuya and Joseph, Yuya and Yosef, Yuya and Yosef, Yusef is Joseph is a name of Joseph, you see. So I argue that Yuya was the son, was an Israelite, the son of Jacob, you see. And Amenhotep III, not only, it seems to me, if you just leave out the imagination and the fiction, necessary for the biblical account, it seems to me that Joseph came to Egypt deliberately, looking for his father, grandfather, in a way. Mm-hmm. Because if you see the dreams of Jacob in Canaan before coming, from the first time, we find that Jacob had a twin brother called Esau, and Jacob believed that he had some kind of Esau being the first one to come out, had some kind of birthright, and then eventually Esau wanted to have a lentil soup made by Jacob. I saw it. Jacob asked him if he can give you your birthright, and he sold his birthright for a lentil soup. What is birthright? The Bible does not explain what is this birthright. The birthright is a kind of an inheritance. It seems that Jacob himself believed, from his mother eventually, his grandmother, Sarah, that Sarah was a queen in a way. The word Sarah indicates princess in Hebrew. She was regarded as a kind of a queen of Egypt or something. And the memory, it seems that the memory within the families of Isaac, through Jacob and so on, believed. Some of them took it seriously, and some of them, Esau did not take it seriously, so he sold his right for a soup, a lentil soup. But Jacob took it seriously, and it seems also that he handed it down to his son, 11th son, Joseph, who from the very start believes, that he one day will sit on a throne, and his father and his brothers will. He believed of this royal kind of. It seems somehow that Joseph came to Egypt looking, deliberately looking, not just by chance, for his great ancestors of the Pharaoh. And for Amenhotep III to appoint him as, not only appoint him as his minister, but he also married his daughter, Tai. Amenhotep III, the king of Egypt, married Tai, the daughter of Uya, whom I identify as Joseph. And he made her his queen against the Egyptian customs. So even Amenhotep III, a descendant of King David of history, the Thutmose III, must have realized that Uya, Joseph, was also descendant for Thutmose III through the line of Sarah. Otherwise, he would not have married his daughter, and not only married her, because the king, Amenhotep III, married 300 women, but he made her his queen. And it was this union between Amenhotep III, eventually I regard to be the character of Solomon. He must have realized, he reconnected the two lines of the Davidic line, the one from the Egyptian queen and the one from the Sarah the Hebrew. They were united by the time of Amenhotep III, or Solomon, who married her, and the union brought up Akhenaten. Akhenaten, who I regard as Moses. Akhenaten, who was the first monotheistic king of Egypt, the first monotheistic king all over the world. From historical sources, the first king, the first person to say that, in Egyptian, everything took place in Egypt. The whole development took place in Egypt, the spiritual thing. Because from the early times, from the time of the building of the pyramids, the Egyptians realized that humans have two dimensions. One physical, the body that dissolves after death, and the other one is a spiritual thing, the ka, that leaves the body at the time of death. But they believe that the ka is eternal, that not die. And if they can keep the body through mummification, keep it safe, and put it in a secure kind of tomb with the magical spells of the Book of the Dead, then the spirit one day, they believe, will come back in the body to have the resurrection. So the Egyptians were the first people. No other nation, not even the Bible, not even Abraham, and nobody believed in ancient times that there was a spiritual dimension with the body dimension except in Egypt. In India, they believe that the person becomes reincarnated in another form. But this is the only country in the world from the time of the pyramids. We know that. Eventually, when Akhenaten came to power, the priests of Amun denied his right to the throne because his mother was not the heiress. The Egyptian throne was inherited through the female line. Whoever marries the eldest daughter of Pharaoh has the right to succeed Pharaoh on the throne. That's because they believe in the holy birth of Pharaoh. At the time when Pharaoh gets married to his wife, he had to go through a ritual in the temple. They takes out all his clothes. He's purified by Nile water, and then by different oils and so on. And the priests of Amun make chanting and so on, asking for the spirit of Amun to come and dwell in the body of Pharaoh. And when they see a sign that this has taken place, they put the headgear of the god Amun on his head, and he goes to his wife. So the child is born the son of Amun spiritually and the son of Pharaoh physically, because they believe that the two lands of Egypt belonged to Amun, and nobody could rule Egypt unless he was the son of Amun. Now, also they believe that if the wife of Pharaoh was not the heiress, if she was not the daughter of the previous Pharaoh, the Amun's spirit would not come to so they will not, the child born will not be a legitimate son of Amun, you see. So they have no right to follow his father on the throne. So because Akhenaten's mother was the daughter of Joseph, of Uya, and not the daughter of Pharaoh, Akhenaten, the priest of Amun, rejected his right to the throne because he is an illegitimate son of Amun. So in this case, this is a universal kind of, this is, Henry Priestley said about Akhenaten, he was the first individual in human history, because you see, he thought about it, and he came to the conclusion that really, as humans have two dimensions, one physical and one spiritual, the whole universe, the cosmos, also have a spiritual dimension. Atom, he called atom as the heat of the light coming from the sun. It is not the sun. The sun is Ra, not atom. Atom is the light or the energy coming from the sun. He believed that Atom is the real God, and he's a universal God for all people, and he denied all the other gods. So, the reunion between the branch of Thutmose III, whom I identify as King David, from the pharaonic line came to Amenhotep III, who was reunited with the Sarah's descendants from Isaac in the daughter of Joseph, Queen Tai, produced Akhenaten, who obviously became the first monotheist, whom I identify as Moses as well. So this is the connection between the Israelites and the Egyptian pharaonic family. Produced this universal kind of new the fusion of these two. This is the way I can see it.
You just mentioned the fusion of spirituality, a union between the two regions, like we discussed earlier. But one of the artworks, like the pyramids, that makes this connects these two overlapping stories by like 500 years. Like the Pharaoh story is about 500 years before King David. But what connects stories is the Ark of the Covenant, and then you get an Egyptian Ark as well, the Ark of Amun. Can you tell us a little bit about how those two sacred relics fit into your theory?
Okay. The Egyptians used to take the image of Amun, the image of any deity, image of Amun, in a kind of a boat, ark kind of situation, in the time of festivals. They have some festival, yearly festival, and people come around and slaughter some animals and make a feast and so on. and the priests will carry this ark around for people to see and so on. When Akhenaten came to power, Moses, came to power. I believe Moses and Akhenaten were one and the same person. He did not believe, obviously, that a deity can be represented in an image, you see. So instead, he used the ark. Akhenaten used all the rituals, but he gave them a different kind of significance by putting the covenant, the covenant in the ark. However, the ark that David took to Jerusalem was not if you read the Bible, they talk about the book of, the Ark of Covenant, but when the Bible talks about David taking the Ark to Jerusalem, he never mentioned the Ark of the Covenant. He mentioned the Ark of the Lord. I tell you why, because when Thutmose III, I better tell you about Thutmose III a little bit more because it is interesting to know. He was a grandson of Thutmose I, who fought first in the Levant before him, but he did not. Although he went all the way to the Euphrates, upper Euphrates, northern Syria, and he put a kind of a stone there with his name, but he did not leave any garrisons, military garrisons, to keep the empire. So empire, as soon as he left, he lost the whole thing. Amenhotep II, Thutmose II, was the son of an ordinary woman, but because he married Hatshepsut, the royal heiress, he became a king because he was able to marry the royal heiress Hatshepsut. Now, Amenhotep, Thutmose II, married an ordinary woman called Isis and brought Thutmose III. And he wanted Thutmose III, his son, to marry his daughter from Hatshepsut, the heiress, in order to allow him to have the chance to follow him on the throne. But Hatshepsut refused to have her daughter married to this boy. So, in fact, what he wanted to do, Thutmose II, before he died, to ensure that his son, Thutmose III, follows him on the throne, he made a kind of a ritual kind of occasion in the temple of Karnak. And he went there, and he has his son, he was a young boy, standing there, and the priest carried the Ark of Amun around the temple, chanting and so on. And the Ark came to the child, to the boy, and obviously the priest carrying the Ark, and they took him and went to the throne, the royal throne, and asked him to sit there. So in a way, he was kind of, adopted. Although he was not born as the son of Amun, now he made this, through this action, he became adopted by Amun as being his son. And then again, when he grew up, he wrote on his part of the Karnak temple the story of how he went there. He was ushered to heaven after this occasion. He went to heaven. Obviously, this is a spiritual kind of experience. He went to heaven when he was by Ra, God Ra himself, who placed on his forehead the snake, the snake which is regarded by the Egyptians as the royal kind, the sign of royalty in the Egyptian, on the Egyptian crown. he was crowned by God himself, by Amun himself. Strangely enough, in the Talmud we have a story, or the Midrash, Jewish Midrash, we have a story of Abraham having this journey to heaven. And then again, Muhammad has another journey to heaven. I mean, all this is making the same story as Moses said. So he came to heaven. Anyhow, when Hatshepsut, when his father died, Hatshepsut did not allow him to rule, although he was appointed as king, because he was a young boy. She kept him behind, and she ruled herself the country until she died, and then he became the only ruler. And what he first did, he went to Canaan to establish the empire. And he went with his army, and he took with him at the head of the army the Ark of Amun, the image of Amun in an ark going at the beginning of the army. And the first location he met was, in an area now in Israel, near a mount of Mageddon, Har Mageddon, the Mount of Mageddon. There he was near the mount. There was a kind of secured town, secured fortress, where 300 kings, local kings of Canaan, because at the time there was no one state. Canaan was every city was a kingdom or ruled by a prince or a king. So all these 300 of them came from Syria and Canaan and gathered in front of this Har Mageddon and to meet him when he came. And before he came, he had two ways of reaching this location. One of them was an easy way around the mountain so he can come and face them. And the other thing is through a narrow kind of way across the mountain, over the mountain. That's a narrow space. And his generals asked him to go through the easy way around the mountain. But he refused and decided to go through the narrow way. So he surprised these enemies by coming behind them. So they were scattered and went inside the castle and closed it around them. And he retired. Then he went to the east, to Jerusalem. At the time, Jerusalem was not known as Jerusalem or Yerushalayim. It was known as Kadesh. Kadesh means, in the ancient language, means holy, the holy place, because of the rock. Jerusalem has this holy nature. The Israelites and ancient people, anyhow, in these areas, used to worship on the top of a high mountain, and they have a kind of a rock. And this was a natural rock, so it was a holy place for the whole people of the area. So he went there, and he placed the Ark of Amun on the rock, because this was he stayed there for 6 months until his army was able to capture Mageddon, and he went to. So for 6 months he stayed there. He went with the Ark of the God of his Lord. So in fact, when one of the things that when the Bible says David went to Jerusalem, only few of his men. Also, he had, according to the Bible, his army was surrounding a city, and he was waiting for it to fall down. Exactly the same as what Moses said. And he place the Ark of the Lord. The only thing in the Bible that does not mention the Ark of the Covenant, but the Ark of the Lord, Ark of God. And it was the first Ark to go to Jerusalem was the Ark of Thutmose III. He went there for 6 months, and then he went to capture. Even until now, the fight between Thutmose III, David, and this 300 kind of princes and kings of the. It is supposed, believed that the Messiah will have to fight the Ark, this Megiddo war at the end of days. When he reappears, he will have to fight this war between good and evil and defeat the enemies at that level. This is a messianic kind of belief. Anyhow, what I want to say is that Thutmose III. If we look at the biblical location mentioned in the Bible to be destroyed by in either the book of Kings or the book of Samuel to be destroyed by King David, we find Thutmose III evidence that on the level of 15th century BC, evidence that Thutmose III established. Not only that, but the Bible. You can look at the Bible and see. He says, and David, after going to Jerusalem, went out to recover his borders at the Euphrates. The Bible didn't say that David had a kingdom before extending to the Euphrates. And then he had, although he had only 600 men as his followers, suddenly we find him having thousands of chariots and thousands of armor and so on, and making but the whole. If you and then again, the death of King David, empire is supposed to have been inherited by Solomon, King Solomon, whom I obviously regard as the third. However, according to the Bible, after the death of Solomon, exactly like Amenhotep III, Solomon had a large harem in his house. Amenhotep III had 300 women in his house. Solomon married the daughter of Pharaoh. Amenhotep III married his sister, the daughter of Pharaoh, before marrying the daughter of Joseph. Solomon, although Solomon is supposed to have built the temple of God, he is said by the Bible to have been worshipping other gods at the same time. He worshipped other gods. He said that his foreign wives persuaded him to worship other gods, which is very strange. He built the temple of God. However, we find this exactly the same situation with Amenhotep III, because Amenhotep III, who worshipped many deities of the Egyptian deities, when his son Akhenaten brought his Aten, one god, he claimed his one god. Amenhotep III also believed in the one god of Akhenaten, his son. So a similarity between Amenhotep III and Thutmose III. Even the way the country was divided into, the empire was divided into 12 different sections, each section provided by tax from a certain area. Exactly what happened, the Bible says about Solomon is found in history because about Amenhotep III.
Yeah, and since we're talking about the similarities between the biblical Solomon and Tutmosis Amenhotep III, we might as well stop and take some time to look at the palaces of these two historical figures. You draw many parallels. The colossi found at the the place at the mortuary center at Thebes or Memphis.
Yes,
Let's talk about those two. We got a nice description of the Ark of the Covenant. Now let's look at the duality of the two palaces.
Yeah, I mean, it is also, again, the Bible says that, King Solomon built a great house in Jerusalem. He built a great house, and next to it, he built the temple of God. And they say that he asked the king of Tyre, Hiram, the king of Tyre in Phoenicia, to send him some workers, wood, to send him wood, because Tyre has a lot of wood, cedar wood, and he sent him the architect as well, and he to build the temple and the palace in Jerusalem next to each other. Obviously, digging in Jerusalem have been going on for many years, and until now, until this moment of history, there's no evidence. They ever have found either of the temple or the palace. I have to say that Amenhotep III, whom I regard as Solomon, built different small shrines. Any city that has an Egyptian military garrison, and in Jerusalem there was a military garrison, so he has built a small temple at the same location of the Temple Mount. And the rock, dome of the rock. He built a temple there, a small temple, but his main temple was not there because all the archaeology work has failed to find any evidence. However, we know that Amenhotep III, when he came to the throne, like previous royal members of royal family in Egypt, 18th dynasty, where they had their houses in Memphis near Cairo, near Saqqara. This was the location of the royal palace. However, he built on the west side of Thebes, Luxor, he built a new house, a great house for himself, a royal house, a temple next to it, exactly as whatever we find in the Bible describing the royal palace of Solomon and the temple they built in Jerusalem. We find all the evidence of that only in the west coast of the Nile, across the Thebes, Luxor. We find the remains of the royal palace have been found, a great royal palace, exactly with a section for the queen, daughter of Pharaoh, and section for the king, and all these sections are found exactly as in the Bible, and we find remains obviously of the temple next to it, and the two pillars. This is a strange thing that mentioned in front of the temple of Solomon's temple, there was two pillars, and these two pillars are giving names. And obviously, if you have a pillar, just a stone, you cannot give a name to a stone because it looks like any other stone. But it has to be, if you look at the temple of Amenhotep III on the west bank of the Nile, you have this, this great statues of Amenhotep III himself, the highest statues all over with different Memnon, the Memnon, two Memnon statues are very well known Memnon statues. They used to make noise, musical noise, when the sun shines in the morning. The two Memnon statues, the eyes of, they represent the Pharaoh himself, but each one of them is given a different name, because although it's the same king, but he looks different from one side to the other. That's why they're standing until this moment. And the important thing about it is that they see the first rays of the sun comes in the very early morning, shines exactly straight to the eyes of the Memnon statues. This is a kind of a worship kind of thing. Yeah, until this moment. So I think the main temple was built not in Jerusalem, although he built a temple, small temple in Jerusalem, in the same location where later, the Jews built the temples. The temple of the Jewish temple was built at the same location as the same the Holy of Holies of the Jewish temple, which was destroyed by Romans on 70 AD, was the rock. The rock is the holy place all over the place, even before building the temple. And it became the Holy of Holies for the Jewish temple, which was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. This was a small temple also built by Amenhotep III, which is Solomon, and which I think now, I believe that, you cannot really expect an Israeli state to be complete without its temple. So I hope that eventually that the Temple Mount will allow the Israelis to have their own temple around the Dome of the Rock in the location, as the Muslims have the mosque at the south section. It can be a unification of the two religious faiths rather than a conflict area. In fact, it can unite people in modern times and in their worship of the same God. They should be worshiping the one God. If it's the one God, then it has to be one for everybody in the same location. So I think, yes, as you said, again, if we look at the name of the Phoenician king of Tyre, Hiram. If we look at the history of Hiram from historical sources, we find no king of Hiram at this location at all. Although Josephus mentioned the name of Hiram, but Josephus got it from the Bible, not from history. You can trust Josephus when he talks about his contemporary events. Because he came from a priestly family from Jerusalem, and he witnessed the destruction of Jerusalem on the hands of the Romans in 70, and then he went to Rome, and he wrote his. So whatever he wrote about things he witnessed himself, you can trust what he says. Otherwise, when he talks about ancient times, he's just referring to the biblical account. So we cannot trust. Other than Josephus, no mention of any king of Tyre called Hiram. And then again, Hiram Abif. The Hiram Abif is regarded by the Masons as the Grand Master. The first builder who built the Temple of Solomon, because they regard the Temple of Solomon is the main holy place that they worship. in reality, there's nobody called Hiram Abib. And but we have another person. I mean, we have the architect who built the temple of Amenhotep III, whom I regard as Solomon, King Solomon, and he is called Amenhotep, son of Habu. Amenhotep, his name, the architect, the great architect, he built not only this temple and the royal palace, he built all other temples as well. He was responsible for all the structures in the country. He was a great man, and he a great architect, and he built the temple of royal palace and the temple of Amenhotep III. He's the namesake of Amenhotep III, Amenhotep, son of Habu. I mean, the other one mentions the Bible, Hiram. His name, same name as the king Hiram, and Hiram Abib. Abib is his son, his father. Hiram Abib. Abib means Abi is father in Hebrew. F is his. Abib, Hiram Abib, Hiram, the son of his father. In fact, with son Amenhotep, son of Habu, Habu is his father. So Amenhotep is named after the king himself, Amenhotep, son of his father, Abib, son of his father. This is the same name. And if you look at the traditions of the Masonic traditions, you find a very strange thing. Although they regard Hiram Abib, the Phoenician Hiram Abib, as being their Grand Master, at the very same time, they regard Hermes Trismegistus as their Grand Master. So it is a confusion unless you come to my interpretation of the Egyptian location. You cannot identify that because, I mean, even his name. Hiram, his name was written in the Bible with different vowels. The consonants are the same, HRM, but Hurum, Hiram, and so on, different. HRM, if you just add the S at the end, Hermes, HRMS, Hermes. In fact, this is his name. Not only that, this is the first person in history we know who became the Lord of Magic. The Lord of Knowledge and Magic is the ancient word for science. Now we know science. Before the 16th, 17th century AD, we knew nothing about science. Science was came from the Hermetic. Science came from ancient Egyptian magic. Ancient Egyptian magic. We know about the Book of Hermes, Hermetic book, in the 15th century BC, AD. The Prince of Florence. Both the Ottomans attacked. Constantine, the temple, the city of Constantine is Istanbul now. They call it Istanbul. They attacked it, and there was they crossed the Dardanelles, and they attacked it, and they found the library there of many books written in Greek. Some of it were copies of books that have been burned down in the Alexander Library in 39 AD. So one copy of it was the book of Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes, the Hermetic book. Now, the Medici Prince of Florence decided to translate this book into Latin. It was one of the books, we know that existed in the Library of Alexandria that was burned down. It contains the ancient Egyptian magic. Magic here is not a kind of some people think magic now. Magic in the ancient Egyptian priests and so on, they were trying to identify, to realize. Looking at the movement of the stars, looking at the nature, the kind of plants that if you can eat these plants or drink some kind of thing, how effective it can save your life, it can bring the temperature down, or how when the Nile rises, you see a special star. They divided time according to the movement of the stars. So magic is really, in ancient times, they wanted to identify, they wanted to know the rules, the natural rules that guard the universe. Because, science, what is science? Is to discover how the rules of nature works without knowing how how can we were able to fly an airplane. They knew exactly the rules of nature. If we go according to the hidden rules of nature, if you are able to find out, realize, discover the rules of nature and use them, this is all the new science is trying to do that. So the ancients have already done that. They called it magic, but it was the knowledge of the hidden rules of nature that other people did not understand, but the priests kept it in their own. They didn't want it to be. The priesthood in Egypt did not reveal all the knowledge to ordinary people. They thought knowledge has to be given only to people who can be able to use it correctly. Anyhow, with the translation of the book of Hermes Trismegistus, Isaac Newton started by his work. If you read his own, writing, he left his own secret writing. It was discovered. He started as a magician, working on the ancient Egyptian magic of Hermes Trismegistus before becoming a great scientist for the first time. So modern science is no more than ancient. Now, this guy, Hotep, son of Habu, became recognized. He became recognized, identified by ordinary people as Hermes. Hermes is the Greek word for the Egyptian Tuhut, the god of knowledge and the god of magic. So Hermes, the Greek word Hermes is called. The name of the Egyptian magic. And he became known. His statue was established. 2 statues of him was established within the Karnak temple, and we have evidence all through the time, from his time in the 14th century until the Roman times. All this time, people went to his statues and asked him to intervene. With gods, you see, and save the sick children, or do something for them. He was the first mediator. He was the first, saint, if you can say. He was regarded as saint in the 14th century BC and remained as such for more than 1,000 years. Until his followers eventually became known as the Gnostics. who produced the Nag Hammadi documents in the 1st and the 2nd century AD. I mean, in Alexandria. I mean, he is the one really. He is who I mean, and the Gnostics are regarded by the Masons as their origin, because the Masons, when the Church of Rome, I mean, established, regarded these Gnostics, early Gnostic Christians as heretics, they destroyed all their writings and they forbade them. And so when they scattered in Europe, they were not able to keep any written documents of their own. So they get some different knowledge orally through or symbolically, some kinds in some kind of a painting or a text or something. So when the Freemasons started to re-establish themselves again in the 17th century AD, they had some confused knowledge of their ancestry, but they always related to themselves to Alexandria and the Gnostics of Alexandria and the Hermetic philosophy. And I think this is, I mean, now with my book and my discovery, this is the first evidence to confirm really this connection.
Yeah, and Ahmed, throughout your book, the Egyptian origins of King David and the Temple of Solomon, you do draw on the Hermetics book, the Nag Hammadi, the Apocrypha Bible, especially the Book of Thomas. So you have a lot of ancient texts you're drawing from for your information. Plus, you're able to read the hieroglyphs at the Temple of at Luxor. So the readers get a comprehensive view of the whole time period of all these ancient texts.
Yeah, I mean, I spent about 40 years now. I mean, I didn't do it to start with, really. When I started doing my research, I didn't intend, I didn't have it in my mind to write about it. I just wanted to know for myself, what is the reason, what is the cause of this, continuous struggle without coming to sit down and make it up. So I wanted to know, but when I started to know, I wanted other people to know. Yeah, so I have to follow up the whole story. Because you see, although through the last 150 years or so, archaeologists have been able to find ancient monuments and ancient texts and ancient things, including the Nag Hammadi Gospels and the Dead Sea Scrolls of the Dead Sea, Qumran. You see, people have not been able to, the time, in my view, has come for us to re-understand the ancient stories of our, biblical stories according to the new scientific and archaeological discovery, without explanation. How can we understand? We have a completely different kind of sources telling us different things. What can we believe? We have, if we go to history, I want the day when we go to find the story of Moses and David and so on from the book of history, not from the Bible. The Bible is a book of faith. If you believe in something, nobody can challenge you, whatever you believe in. Different people believe in different things, and this is up to them. They can believe in it. But if we come to history, it is not a personal belief. History has to be factual. Now history is becoming part of science. And without knowing our history, we will not be able to establish our understanding of the future. Now, every day, scientists are finding out information that opens the mind to things we never knew about different planets, different universe, the nature of our world, the humans and the creatures that were on Earth. We have to know the facts to establish our belief on facts rather than in the mythology and fairy tales. Obviously, miraculous events, science cannot establish miracles. But if you want to believe in miracles, it's up to you to believe in any miraculous event. People can believe in whatever. Belief is something personal. Yeah, but knowledge is common. We have to understand and agree. And to be common, we have to have the evidence. So we have to go to history, so I had to go really from the very beginning. The very beginning of the Bible started with Abraham. I mean, before Abraham, the creation and the flood is really a mythological kind of, because the earth was not created by God 5,000 years ago. This is not true. And humans were here hundreds of thousands of years ago. So this is not a symbolic kind of explanation, like the Greeks when they had this mythology of them. So ancient people had this mythology. But if we come to history, Abraham is a historical person. David is a historical person. Moses came, the whole idea of the Exodus and the Israelites and the Bible is the Exodus. The cornerstone of the Bible is the Exodus. It's a historical event by historical people. So we have to know this from historical sources, not only from the Bible. And then it will not obviously affect any different belief. If you believe in miracles, you can believe in whatever you like. But if we have to stand to identify history, then we have to have historical sources. And this is what I wanted to know all the time. I'm now 84 years old, and I'll be 85 in 3 months' time. But before I leave this world, I want to know as much as I don't want to die, to leave this world with something, in my, kind of research that I still haven't known.
Yeah, part of the, what you're looking for is understanding all the mysteries of Egypt, and part of your book is covering, the knowledge, from Alexandria, what was just compiled over the centuries. You cover the Egyptian magic, and you do spend devote some time to discussing the magic of when the staffs were thrown down and they turned into snakes. Can you explain a little bit about how we are to understand that scene from the Old Testament?
You see, I said when the Romans came to Egypt, 30 years BC, and Cleopatra, Queen Cleopatra VII, was the last queen who committed suicide when the Romans came. And the Romans did not really care too much about the Egyptian temples. So they kept the temple of Alexandria, but they did not spend any money on the other temples. Egyptians by nature are, they discovered God. They discovered the Spirit. They discovered God. They rather than in modern days, we think about a prophet coming from God, teaching people how to understand the nature of God. In Egypt, it was a different situation. The Egyptians themselves were wandering around, trying to find how are these worlds created? Is there a God? First of all, they regarded every different power as a God. The Nile is a God, the sun is a God, the moon is a God, and so on. And then they wanted to know, they wanted to discover. And then the temple for the Egyptians was not just a place of worship. The temple was a place of teaching. The school was, if you want to study the language and so on, the school is in the court of justice is in the temple. The feasts every god has a different feast, celebration, dancing, music. Medicine. If you want to if you are ill or sick, you have. So the temple was the center of the whole social kind of life. And when the Egyptians, the temples were closed because the Romans did not want to spend any money on the temples, they closed down, except the Serapeum of Alexandria. So the Egyptians, a lot of Egyptians were kind of lost. They felt lost. Some of them left their homes, left their thing, and went to the desert and meditated there and trying to find salvation. And this is what the Gnostic thing came. Gnostic is trying to know, but not scientific knowledge, not the historical knowledge, but the spiritual knowledge. And then eventually they came to realize this is a third development in the Egyptian kind of spiritual realization. And I told you before, from the pyramid time and the Book of the Dead, Egyptians realized that humans have two dimensions, one spiritual and one physical. And then after about 1,000 years, when Akhenaten came, he really identified the cosmos, the physical world, as also have a spiritual dimension, atom, or the light, as you can say. The third state took place really around Alexandria in the first century AD, when they came to realize. This thing has developed through the ISIS belief and the ISIS sect. The ISIS is so. The story of Isis and Osiris is supposed that Osiris, brother and husband of Isis, was killed by his brother Set, who was the devil kind of thing. He was killed. And his body was divided into 14 sections. So Isis brought the different parts of his body together and put it together, and with some kind of a magical thing, it is believed that he came back from the, he was, but not as a living person, as a king of the dead. Osiris became the king of the dead, you see. So eventually, through the cult of Isis, in the beginning, people believed that you have to, Egyptian believed that you have to go through the ritual of being mummified and buried in a secure tomb and so on, with the Book of the Dead, to be able to have a chance to live the second life. But obviously only rich people, kings and rich people, were able to spend all this money for this. Ordinary people have no right for the second life because they cannot afford mummification. They cannot afford secure. Not all Egyptians were mummified. Only the rich people and the pharaohs. Ordinary people have not chance for the second life. Now, within the cult of Isis, after some kind of ritual developed, that if you were to be cleansed by water, to be the Nile water, to be cleansed by the Nile water, you come out and you be clean, reborn as a new person. Things of that nature started to appear before. Then with the Gnostics, with these people, this development came to a different thing. They, for the first time, they realized that, you see, the spiritual part of the person is part of the universal spirit. The spiritual spirit is part of the universal spirit. So that's why, from the Christian belief, for instance, if you can believe, you haven't seen it, you didn't see it, nobody saw it really, that Jesus Christ was killed, was crucified, died on the cross, but he was resurrected. This is not scientific, but it's a belief. If you can believe in that, if your mental mind, if your inner self can accept that, then you are there, and then your third eye has been opened. Then there and then you have recognized your own spiritual dimension within you, and so you are eternal. There is no death after that. You have been eternal. So death, in fact, is nothing more than unification between the spiritual dimension and the universal spirit. You see, it is the Gnostics came to. This is the Gnostic belief. They realized there is no death. So it was a great hope, the great festival. People believed in that. Early Christianity was a great joy, because ordinary people who had no chance to be mummified, no chance to spend no money to do that, suddenly realized that they can, once they can open the third eye, they can see the risen Christ, and there and then they earn eternal life. They are eternal. They don't need to be mummified any longer. This is the new birth of the whole new idea of Christianity. It was really, we can see that even in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Gnostic. In the Nag Hammadi documents. The knowledge of even then, you can find a lot of sayings attributed to Jesus or to the spiritual. When it is not said, it was not said by any spiritual. It is, if any person, even a young person, if you can reach spiritually within your experience, if you can go, even in the Sufi kind of modern Sufi, if you practice some rituals and so on, and go through some spiritual thing, you can experience, a kind of contact with God. And if you hear some words and so on, you can come and say, God says so and so, and God said nothing, but this is what you heard. This is what was delivered to you through this experience. So this is a situation that spread really during the first part of the 1st century AD in Alexandria, and from Alexandria to other parts of the world.
Yeah, Ahmed, we have maybe 14 minutes left. I just wanted to tell the listeners, if you like what you've heard today, Ahmed's book is really captivating. Just looking at these, a case of mistaken identities throughout history. His book is entitled "The Egyptian Origins of King David and the Temple of Solomon," and he just gave us all this information that all started in Egypt about having this, what you said is great hope and monotheism and afterlife. And if people want to get Egyptian Origins and your other books, they can go to innertraditions.com. They can find it on Amazon. And if they like what they heard today, there is a mini-series that is going to be appearing on the Discovery Channel, and you recently returned to Cairo to film a segment for this mini-series. Can you tell us a little bit about what...
some years ago, I was in Italy, in Torino. In Torino, in northern Italy, there was a conference of Egyptologists. So I was there, and Zahi Hawass, who was responsible for Egyptian archaeology, Egyptian monuments, he was there. I have written the book identifying Moses as Akhenaten. Moses and Akhenaten, one and the same person. So he blamed me, saying, "How dare you say that an Egyptian pharaoh has Jewish blood?" So I was a little bit surprised. I told him, Muhammad, our Muslim prophet, is said to be a descendant from Abraham through Ishmael. Abraham being the grandfather of the Jews. So, what is the blood to do with it? So so I told him then, he said to me, they offered me $1 million to write a book about Akhenaten, and I refused. So I told him, anyhow, according to the Bible, Moses died in the desert, and he was buried in a tomb near the mountain. So his body was never found, and his tomb was never found. On the other hand, we know that Akhenaten built a tomb for himself in Amarna. He had a tomb established for himself, but although he was succeeded by his son Tutankhamun, he was not buried. No evidence indicates that he was buried in this tomb. So, and no, his mummy was not found anywhere else. So I told him, Yani, if you were able to find the mummy of Moses, of Akhenaten, then my argument is not correct, because Moses was not buried in a tomb. Joseph, according to the Bible, Joseph was mummified and buried in a tomb. The Bible, the last part of the book of Genesis says that Joseph, the patriarch, was mummified and buried according to Egyptian system. However, Moses was not allowed to enter the promised land, and he died in northern Sinai somewhere, and he was buried near the mountain. So if he were found, Akhenaten's mummy, so what? He wanted to. He was became a minister of antiquity in Egypt, so he had the power to do what he wants. So what he wanted is to prove me wrong. So he went. There was a mummy found in tomb 55 in the Valley of the Kings, tomb 55, a skeleton, because the body was deteriorated. So it was placed. It belonged to somebody called Semenkara. Semenkara was a brother of Akhenaten, Semenkara, who died as a young man, about 23 years of age, and he was buried in the tomb 55. They found his tomb, and they placed his mummy in the Cairo Museum under the name Semenkara, identified. So Hawass, in order to prove me wrong, he took the mummy of Semenkara and claimed that this is the mummy of Akhenaten. And now it is in the Cairo Museum under the name of Akhenaten. So, you see, so, the Discovery Channel have a program. They have 7 different parts. First part is going to be on the 10th of April. I don't know which part is my part, but I'm talking about the mummy of, this mummy of skeleton of Semenkara. I am saying that it does not belong to Akhenaten, you see. And they also have a lady, expert from the British Museum, who confirms that because he is the mummy, when she is not Egyptologist, she is a physicist. When she examined the mummy, she found that his wisdom tooth had just started to appear. It's not. So she said this mummy belongs to somebody who is no more than 23 years old when he was killed and when he died. So in this case, it could not be Akhenaten. Akhenaten is not known to have come to the throne when he was 16, and he ruled for 17 years. So the end of his rule was 34 years. This mummy is belongs to somebody else. So I want to talk to Rami Romani. His name is Rami, the guy who is representing the argument. It's called Rami Romani in Discovery. I just explained my views, and I think they brought this lady expert to confirm what I said about the age. It's not possible. So I believe the time has come that we accept facts, you see. Taboos and so on. What is wrong with in fact, not only Akhenaten and Moses were one and the same person. I believe that the Israelites himself were descended from Egyptian Pharaoh. Israel, Jacob, the son of Isaac, Isaac, the son of Pharaoh. So the line of David, through Isaac and David and so on. This is an Egyptian. The Israelites originally were Egyptians, you see. It's not Hebrews. Hebrews are not Egyptians. Hebrews are Bedouins coming from Arabia who migrated to, but the lady, Sarah was a Hebrew lady who was married to Pharaoh. of Egypt. And so the descendant of Pharaoh, I believe that Israelites were descended of Pharaoh, and I don't have any problem with having a mixed blood, with the Israelites.
We're down to about 4 minutes. Ahmed, you have so much of a exciting heritage to draw from. You grew up in Cairo, and you visited so many of these Thebes and Memphis, the pyramids, everything that so many of us who are listening to you, hope to see someday. What's your next project?
I have not yet started, but what I want to see now, what I want to do, if I have the time to do it, is to show that the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi are, cannot just be dismissed. They are just because you see, it will change completely our understanding of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. It will not make people disbelieve, but it will correct the source of their belief. You see, the way the church and the Islamic, the Quran comes from. I think the Islam is a Judeo-Christian religion, really. The Christian Jews of the Gnostics, of Dead Sea Scrolls. The grandfather of Muhammad was a Jew by his mother. His mother was Jewish. There are things that are hidden, and maybe before we could not accept that because, if there was one God whom we believe in, then there cannot be one God for the Jews, one God for the Muslims, one God for the Christians, one God for the Indians, and it has to be one God for everybody. So we have to be brothers again. Although we disagree in many things, we have to realize the fact that we come from the same source.
Okay, that's a great message to wrap up with. You started with the unification theme, and all these ideas began in ancient Egypt, and I think you just brought us up to going into the Easter weekend about treating everyone well. So we're down to a minute. If you liked Ahmed's information today, it's a fascinating book. Go to Inner Traditions, order The Egyptian Origins of King David and the Temple of Solomon by Ahmed Osman. Thank you so much, Ahmed. It was a terrific discussion. We appreciate you being a guest, and you'll be back on Monday the 22nd.
Thank you for inviting me.